Aggression. Well, it's there's wars going on all over the place. We're fighting the Houthis, I guess. I guess we are. Ukraine is fighting against Russia and whatnot. Don't get too excited about my shirt. I'm from Muncie, Indiana, the home of Ball State University, and this is a Ball State shirt. So there you go. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Interpersonal aggression. The world was shocked in 1993 when a body of a 2-year-old boy was found brutally beaten to death. Two 10-year-old boys were implicated in the crime by security camera footage. The case of the beating to death of James Bulger confounded police initially because the blows were not characteristically severe enough to indicate an adult. And these are the two boys stalking the little boy. Here is one of them. This kid right here is the one with the black coat on is in front, and the one with the brown coat is leading the 2-year-old outside. Found him on the railroad tracks, beaten to death by two 10-year-olds. The world celebrated the destruction of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Not 3 years later, with the increase of unemployment from East Germany, 40 hate groups sprung up to protest immigration. In Rostock in 1992, 45 Turkish immigrants were burned to death in the firebombing by German skinheads, and that's what it looked like. Shades of Nazi Germany. That's why they call them skinheads. Tension between the majority Hutu and the ruling Tutsi of Rwanda had been going on for centuries. Periodic massacres had taken place between the military, the Tutsis, and the Hutu. In 1994, when a Hutu government came to power, the Hutu went on a rampage that took 750,000 lives, mostly Tutsis. What's the difference between Hutu and Tutsis? Tutsis are taller, and that's about it. Researchers were shocked to discover that a Canadian survey in 2018 showed that 44% of married women had experienced physical and sexual assault from their spouses. The Canadian image of politeness took a heavy blow. $2 billion a day is spent on arms and armies in the world. In the last 100 years, 250 wars have been fought worldwide at a cost of 110 million lives, whereas wars prior to the 20th century tended to be between armies, at least when Europeans were fighting other Europeans. In the 20th century, man learned to make war on entire populations, and they did. Aggression is physical or verbal behavior intended to hurt someone. Psychologists identify two types of aggression. Hostile aggression is aggression driven by anger and performed as an end in itself, and this type of aggression is also called effective aggression. Instrumental aggression is a means to some other end other than injuring the other individual. A child seizing a toy would be instrumental aggression. Direct aggression refers to overt forms of aggression such as physical aggression, hitting, punching, kicking, etc., and verbal aggression, name-calling, denigration, etc. And here are two guys squaring off. This is in England. Indirect aggression is aggression that is social in nature, social ostracism, deliberate social exclusion. Relational aggression uses aspects of a relationship to cause harm to another person and has elements of both direct and indirect aggression. This form of aggression involves using social ostracism and rejection, indirect aggression, but can also be directly confrontational, direct aggression. An example of the direct aspect of relational aggression occurs when a child tells another child that they will stop liking them unless the child does what they want. In some forms of aggression, the target is harmed verbally through gossip, character assassination, damage to the victim's property, or interference with the victim's advancement toward a goal. This form of aggression is called symbolic aggression. For example, if a person spreads rumors about a coworker in order to keep her from being promoted, the person has used symbolic aggression. A form of aggression is sanctioned aggression. A soldier killing an enemy soldier in battle engages in sanctioned aggression. Self-defense, which occurs when a person uses aggression to protect themselves or others from harm, is another example of sanctioned aggression. Society declares that in certain situations, aggression is acceptable, even mandatory. A soldier who refuses to engage in aggressive behavior may be subject to disciplinary action or even have their military service abruptly ended or executed. Brian Mullen analyzed information from 60 lynchings that took place in the United States between 1899 and 1946 and discovered that the larger the number of people that attended lynchings, the more vicious the murder and mutilation. This would be considered de-individuation. And this isn't a lynching, this is actually a hanging, a public hanging. Look at all those people. De-individuation can be seen with youth gangs, soccer fans, especially in England, soldiers, urban rioters, school children in Scandinavia. This is called mobbing. The children will repeatedly harass or attack an insecure and weak schoolmate. Mob rules with a pack mentality, even in Scandinavia, among toddlers. It's really odd. We don't see this anyplace else around the world, but in Scandinavia, if you're a weakling, the people around you may attack you. Another type of aggression is bullying. Bullying is aggression that is intentional, repetitive, and directed toward an individual of lower power. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, around 20% of students between 12 and 18 in the United States reported being the victim of bullying in school, with more females than males reporting being bullied. Another form of bullying is cyberbullying, which is when bullying takes place via an electronic device. Approximately 12% of public school students report being the victims of cyberbullying. Once again, more females than males report being victims of cyberbullying. Being the target of bullying or cyberbullying has consistently been associated with higher levels of psychological problems such as depression and stress and suicide ideation. Females can be aggressive, but males show higher levels of physical aggression. This is true among humans as well as other animals. Males are more aggressive than females, especially for direct aggression. This gender difference was consistent across age and peaked between 20 and 30 years of age. The gender difference was also consistent across cultures. Archer also found that females used more indirect aggression, social ostracism, but only during late childhood and adolescence. There are relatively large gender differences in real-life expressions of aggression. Statistics for violent crimes show that males are far more likely to commit violent offenses than females. According to the Uniform Crime Statistics compiled by the FBI in 2011, 87.6% of individuals arrested for murder were male. 77.8% of arrestees for aggravated assault were male. In 2020, men committed 77.2% of murders and women committed only 1.3%. Males and females did not differ on the levels of anger underlying aggression. Males tend to favor aggression, verbal or physical, as a method of conflict resolution. Males are more likely to be the target of physical aggression. Males are more motivated to use aggression for revenge than females. Despite hormonal and other physiological differences between males and females, differences in aggressive tendencies and expression may relate more closely to gender roles than to biology. Both boys and girls are encouraged to engage in gender-type activities, and activities deemed appropriate for boys are more aggressive than those for girls. Socialization experiences further reinforce the inborn male push toward being more aggressive. A difference in aggression between males and females is that females tend to be more sympathetic and empathic. Carlo and colleagues studied the relationship between sympathy, parental involvement, and aggression. They found that individuals with high levels of sympathy and empathy were less likely to be aggressive. Most murders represent hostile aggression by someone who knows the victim, all too often someone who is or was romantically involved with the victim. Instrumental aggression occurs in murders when the death of the victim furthers the murderers, as in the case of the cold, calculated killings of crime syndicates. The question that many people have asked over the course of humanity is, are humans instinctually aggressive, or is it society that makes them aggressive? Rousseau felt that society made people aggressive, but Freud in his theory sided with Darwin. Human aggression is the extension of the animal instinct that we cannot control. The instinct theory follows the Freudian and Darwinian concept that man is just as aggressive as any animal due to his instincts. Darwin and later Freud and Lorenz saw aggression as more adaptive than destructive. Just as males in species will be territorial, humans are selectively territorial as well, protecting their food sources and reproductive potential. The neural aspect of aggression can be studied in both humans and animals. Mapping the pathway of aggression, researchers have discovered that human aggressive response is very similar to that of the lowest vertebrates. Thus, aggression is as old as the reptilian brain. Research shows that people who perpetrate egregiously horrendous crimes found that the prefrontal lobe, which acts to reason control of aggression, is 14% smaller in murderers and 15% smaller in antisocial men. Genetic influences. Heredity influences the neural system's sensitivity to aggressive cues. Research with other species shows that aggression can be bred out of a species through selective breeding over several generations. When pedigrees are uncertain or wild species such as wolves are introduced, the outcome can be tragic, as is evidenced by the 4.5 million dog attacks per year. In 2010, there were 34 fatal dog attacks on humans. Most of the 4.5 million victims were children. Half had been bitten in the face. From 1982 to 2006, the Presa Canario were involved in only 30 attacks, but 6 of them led to death. It's one of the largest dogs known in the canine kingdom. You can see how huge they are. Between 1982 and 2006, German Shepherd and German Shepherd mix were involved in 94 attacks, and 13 resulted in death. Between 1982 and 2006, pit bulls were involved in 1,110 attacks, and 104 resulted in death. Between 1982 and 2006, Rottweilers were involved in 409 attacks, and 58 resulted in death. These are pictures of foxes. Now, this is really kind of interesting because this was done in Russia. They decided that they were going to research aggression, and they decided to do it in the fox. And what they discovered was that they could breed out aggressive behavior. But when they bred out aggressive behavior, they also changed the color of their fur and changed the look of their face and changed the shape of their ears. So as you can see, all of these foxes, except for this one, this is a red fox, but all of these foxes are some of the foxes that they bred out the They bred out the aggressive tendencies. Now this one, of course, is a red fox. And that one is more aggressive than the rest of them. And you can see the reason they have the red fox here is because they want you to see the difference in the face structure of the non-aggressive foxes and the fox. Now, interestingly, we have a fox den. It's about 100 yards from our house, out in the cornfield. I think it's going to be a cornfield this year. Anyway, it's out in the middle of the cornfield, and she's got kits. She has kits. And yesterday, strangely enough, yesterday she came and decided she was going to eat the dog's food out of the bowl, which is right beside the house. Of course, she was fairly skittish, but at the same time, I got a really good look at her, and she looked a lot like this one. The tips of her ears were black, her legs were black, and the underside of her tail was black. I've never actually been that close to a fox. You can't really get close to them unless they've been hit by a car. So, but it was really kind of interesting. She certainly looked wild and acted wild, and she didn't look like any of these guys. She had really big ears, and they kept flipping from side to side. She was listening to see if our dog was coming to chase her away. Anyway, this was an experiment done in Soviet Russia, and then it was continued after the Soviet Union collapsed. And you can see the results. They have created foxes that look like puppy dogs. Biochemical influences, blood chemistry will change neural sensitivity. Research and police records indicate that violent people are more likely to drink. Violent people are more likely to become aggressive when they become intoxicated. Intoxicated people are more likely to give a stronger shock when instructed to shock a person, get angrier when they think about relationship conflicts. 4 in 10 violent crimes are committed by people who have been drinking. Just over half of rapists have been drinking before they commit their offense. 80% of the women in college survey who report unwanted intercourse had been drinking or taking drugs before the sexual attack. In 65% of homicides and 55% of in-home fights and assaults, one or both of the individuals involved were drinking. Alcohol is inhibitory. Unfortunately, what it normally inhibits is the individual's reasoning powers. It makes them less self-aware and unable to consider the consequences. Testosterone is also part of the biochemical mix. Aggressive males given drugs to lower their testosterone lose their aggressive tendencies. These individuals tend to be edgier, more impulsive, with a lower tolerance for frustration. When the testosterone level begins to decline, aggressive tendencies begin to decline as well. Men convicted of unprovoked violent crimes tend to have higher testosterone levels than men who commit nonviolent crimes. Males past puberty with high testosterone levels are more prone to delinquency, hard drug use, and aggressive responses to provocation. In contrast to the aggression causing testosterone, serotonin is a neurotransmitter that controls the effects of testosterone in the hypothalamus. Serotonin controls testosterone. Low serotonin levels have been found in violence-prone children and adults. People at lower socioeconomic levels tend to have low serotonin levels. The frustration-aggression theory was first purported by Dollard and Miller just before World War II. The theory states that when someone is frustrated, they are blocked from achieving their goal-directed behavior. They respond with aggressive behavior. Often the aggression is not directly aimed at the frustrating entity, but is displaced on someone else. It is redirected at someone less dangerous. People living in fragile economic or political environments, people of low socioeconomic status, tend to react to economic disappointments with aggressive behavior, often in the form of crime. Usually, these individuals suffer from deprivation, the realization that they don't have what someone else has. Relative deprivation is the realization that one does not have what a comparable entity has. When aggressive acts are rewarded, the individual may learn to act aggressively in the future. This occurs in youth hockey, on our playgrounds, and with terrorists. When terrorists are negotiated with, terrorist acts begin to increase. When they are punished, they tend to decrease. Albert Bandura first proposed his social learning theory back in the early 60s. His experiments with children modeling aggressive behavior has changed the way we look at violent television programming and violent sporting events. Children of physically punitive parents tend to use aggression when relating to others. Looking at the genealogy of physically punitive families, such behavior can often be traced back several generations where the paper trail tends to end, but the abusive physical punishments didn't. 30% of abused children become abusive parents, 4 times the national rate. Absentee parents also lead to violent behavior. 70% of juveniles in detention have only one parent at home. American children raised without fathers are 7 times more likely to be abused, to drop out of school, to become runaways, become unmarried teenage parents, and to commit violent crimes. 2-parent families have increased care, more positive discipline, more educational achievement, fewer uprootings, and a higher income. Researchers have discovered that certain types of people have gravitated to areas of the country where they could act out their aggression. Southerners tend to advocate violence and corporal punishment. Murder rates are 4 times that of the average northern city, and spanking is more prevalent. 18% of non-white and 36% of white Southerners believe that a man has the right to kill to protect his home, and are twice as likely to own a gun as a Midwesterner. Researchers have discovered that pain induces both humans and other species to strike out at the closest target. Leonard Berkowitz has found that aversive stimulation from pain to irritating conditions, uncomfortable noise, or temperature can trigger hostile aggression. This aversive stimulation can even take the form of dashed expectations and personal insults. Researchers have long speculated that the warmer the temperature, the more aggressively people will act. Drivers in Phoenix without air conditioners often react aggressively when stopped in traffic. Pitchers bean more batters during 90-degree weather than in weather below 80 degrees, though their control is comparable in both temperature ranges. Riots in the United States during the 60s and 70s tended to occur in hot weather as compared to cool weather. And these are the Newark riots of 1967. It was hot that summer. Attack. When people are attacked or insulted, they are more likely to respond with aggression. Crowding. Crowding is the feeling that there is too little space per person. People in densely crowded cities report feeling more fearful than people in less crowded areas. Even when the city has a lower crime rate, people still feel more uncomfortable on the streets. And that's one of the things that was happening in Newark. They had race riots in Newark in 1967. The area of Newark that rioted was the black section of town, the ghetto, that had been ghettoized for an extended length of time, and it was very, very crowded. It was also very hot. This was 1967, so a lot of people didn't have air conditioning. A lot of anger, as you can see. Researchers have discovered that aroused states, despite the cause of the arousal, will lead to a more aroused state if an emotional cue is introduced. Therefore, anger can lead to sexual passion as can fear. People are more likely to react with extreme emotions after being stimulated with bright lights or loud noises, such as at a rock concert. Role modeling may link parental aggression and child aggression. Whenever parents are physical or verbal Whenever parents use physical or verbal aggression, they are modeling that behavior for their children. This is a special case of observational learning. Children observe their parents behaving aggressively. They also see that the aggressive behavior works because ultimately the children are controlled by it. Because the behavior is reinforced, both parents and children are more likely to use aggression again. The message sent to the child is loud and clear. You can get your way by using physical or verbal aggression. Through these processes of learning, children develop aggressive scripts which organize and direct their aggressive behavior in childhood and in adulthood. Child abuse is associated with high levels of clinically significant aggression in children. Child abuse has also been linked to aggressive behavior later in life, especially among children who also have intrinsic vulnerabilities such as cognitive, psychiatric, and neurological impairments. Research shows that being abused or witnessing abuse is strongly related to highly violent behavior patterns. Abused and neglected children are more likely to be arrested for juvenile and adult violent criminal behaviors compared to a non-abused, non-neglected control group. And the figures were 26% for the abused and neglected children, 16.8% for the non-neglected control group, and 28.6% as adults, and 21.1%. The arrest rates for juvenile and adult violent crimes, respectively. Children who were only neglected and had a higher arrest rate for violent crime, 12.5%, than non-neglected children had, 7.9%. Lantos et al. Report that abused children were more likely than non-abused children to commit nonviolent and violent offenses. They also found that this relationship was stronger for males than for females. Exposure to abusive situations desensitizes one of the sufferings of others. Not all abused or neglected children show increased levels of aggression. Some factors increase a child's resiliency in the face of child abuse, which moderate the effects of abuse on aggression. Abused children who show prosocial behaviors show fewer signs of psychological problems, for example, depression, somatic problems. They have caregivers with fewer problems, such as depression or alcoholism. A family factor that contributes to aggressive behavior patterns is family disruption, such as an acrimonious divorce. One study investigated family variables such as family income, male employment, and family disruption, defined as a female-headed household with children under age 18, and homicide and robbery rates. The study found that the single best predictor of homicide was family disruption. A similar pattern emerged for robbery committed. Family disruption, strongly related to living under economically deprived conditions, was found to have its greatest effect on juvenile crime as opposed to adult crime. There are cultural differences with respect to the expression of verbal aggression through the use of different invectives. Dayrod et al. Found that invectives referring to social relationships, such as son of a whore, good for nothing, were most common among Spanish participants in the study. Participants in the study from the Netherlands seem to prefer invectives relating to the genital region, for example, prick or scrotum cleaner. They also swear using deadly diseases. For example, you are like the plague, you are a cancer. Study participants from Germany prefer invectives targeting the anal region. For example, asshole, scatology, shit, and heaven, ass, and yarn, dung guy, and social inadequacy. For example, spastic and ass violin. Ass violin? Montag. Montag is German for Monday. The U.S. encompasses many different cultures, but one of the more extreme differences is the difference between the more violent culture in the South and the less violent culture in the North. Statistics show that white male Southerners are more violent than white males in any other parts of the country. Close behind Southerners are select Western states. One explanation for the violent Southern and Western cultures is that the South and West were settled by Europeans from herding cultures that live by a culture of honor, where success can only be achieved by protecting your herd with excess violence to scare away would-be thieves. So what happens if somebody is a cattle rustler? You hang them, right? This is something that happened in the West, and I'm not sure it happened anywhere else. Somebody steals your cow, you don't hang them. Not in Illinois or Ohio, I guess. States with strong culture of honor dynamics show that they have higher homicide rates. They demonstrated higher testosterone levels when insulted. Southern and Western states had more lax gun control laws, more lenient laws concerning using violence for self-defense, and protection of property, more lenient laws for domestic violence offenders, where disciplining one's wife is used as a justification for male perpetrators of domestic violence, and a greater tolerance for the use of corporal punishment. Related school shootings are more frequent in culture of honor states. 75% of school shootings have taken place in American states with relatively strong cultures of honor. Parents play the major role in the socialization of children and probably contribute most heavily to the development of aggressive scripts, though children are exposed to other models as well. Research suggests that there is a link between exposure to television violence and aggressive behavior. Evidence also suggests that the link between watching violent programming and aggression persists from childhood through the adolescence into adulthood. Viewing violence in TV, viewing justified televised violence leads to more aggression. Viewing violence with inaccurate consequences leads to more violence. Viewing plausible violence leads to more aggression. The effect of televised violence is stronger for studies conducted outside the United States than those conducted in the United States. The size of the effect of television violence on aggression is small. Hogbin estimates that if violence were eliminated from television, the overall amount of aggression we see in our culture would go down by around 10%. Indirect aggression is portrayed on television and is shown more frequently, 50.6%, than physical, 17.8%, or verbal aggression, 31.6%. Research also revealed that female characters on television were more likely to engage in indirect aggression than male characters. Research found that girls who were exposed to media portrayals of indirect aggression tended to show higher levels of that form of aggression. There is also evidence that viewing relational aggression on television increases this type of aggression among adolescents. The relationship between violence and the media may not be strong. Correlational studies report relatively low correlations between watching media violence and aggression, and experimental studies typically show weak effects. Although watching violence on television is associated with increased aggression, there is evidence that watching television is also associated with socially appropriate behavior, such as cooperative play or helping another child. Other variables, such as parental aggressiveness and socioeconomic status, also correlate significantly with aggression. One 3-year study conducted in the Netherlands found that the small correlation between violent television viewing and aggression, R is equals 0.23 and 0.29, for boys and girls respectively, virtually disappeared when children's pre-existing levels of aggression and intelligence were taken into account. And of course, 0.23 and 0.29 is really, really low. It's a lot closer to 0 than to 1. Many studies of media violence and aggression are correlational and cannot be used to establish a causal relationship between these two variables. Other variables, such as parental aggressiveness, may contribute causally to both violent television viewing and aggression in children. Many popular games involve moderate to high levels of violence. The popularity of video games containing highly realistic violent content has raised concerns about the effects of such games on children's behavior. A major concern is that exposure to these realistic violent games can cause children and adults to behave aggressively. Does exposure to violent video games increase aggression? The answer to this question is that it can. Anderson and Bushman conducted a meta-analysis of the literature and concluded that playing violent video games increased aggression among both males and females. This was the case regardless of whether the study reported was experimental or correlational. Playing violent video games increases physiological arousal and aggressive thoughts and emotions. Violent video games were also associated with a short-term decrease in prosocial behavior. Generally, research suggests that there is a link between playing violent video games and aggression, and that link is quite strong. There is evidence that playing violent video games increases aggressive thoughts and reduces feelings of empathy. These two outcomes then operate to increase aggression. Exposure to violent video games also affects attitudes about violence and increases aggressive behavior. The content of violent video games tends to be realistically graphically violent, which may affect attitudes concerning aggression. Playing violent video games also increases aggression-related thoughts and emotions. It appears that playing these games affects the player's attitudes, thoughts, and emotions concerning violence. They become less upset by violence. It becomes more acceptable to them. Like watching violent television programming, playing violent video games desensitizes players to violence. One explanation for the heightened aggressive attitudes of video game players is that the violent games bring forth a hostile expectation bias. This bias suggests that violent game players come to expect that other people will respond to potential conflicts by responding violently. The games condition them to expect the others will also act violently. Many groups have protested the depiction of violence against women in pornographic magazines, movies, and on the internet. These groups claim that such sexually explicit materials influence the expression of violence, particularly sexual violence, against women in real life. Sexually explicit materials are those specifically created to produce sexual arousal. Sun et al. In 2014 found that the more pornography men watched, the more likely it was that they would use what they saw on the video during sex with their partners, request specific pornographic sexual acts from their partners, and use pornographic imagery during sex to maintain arousal. In research by Donnelly and Fraser in 1998, 320 college students responded to a questionnaire concerning arousal to sadomasochistic fantasies and acts. The results showed that males were significantly more likely than females to be aroused by fantasizing about and engaging in sadomasochistic sexual acts. Males scored higher than females on measures of being dominant during sex, participating in bondage and discipline, being restrained, and being spanked. A 2015 poll found that 31% of women reported viewing porn every week or so, with another 30% indicating they view porn a few times a month. There is some evidence that women who view pornography are more likely than those who do not to engage in sexual coercion. Kernsmith and Kernsmith reported that the relationship between viewing pornography and engaging in sexual coercion was relatively strong. Besides increasing violence against women, exposure to sexually violent material fosters attitudes, especially among males, that tacitly allow rape to continue. There is a pervasive rape myth in the United States society, which fosters such beliefs as only bad girls get raped. If a woman gets raped, she must have asked for it. Women cry rape only when they've been jilted or have something to cover up. When a woman says no, she really means yes. Men are more likely than women to accept the rape myth. Media portrayals of sexual violence do contribute to rape myths and attitudes. A survey of male fraternity members, Faubert et al., 2011, found a small but statistically significant positive correlation between viewing sadomasochistic or rape pornography and acceptance of the rape myth. Viewing such pornography was also positively correlated with the likelihood, self-reported, of committing a sexually violent crime. In other studies, viewing sexually explicit violent films increased male but not female participants' acceptance of violence against women. Media portrayals of a woman enjoying sexual violence had their strongest impact on males who were already predisposed to violence against women. Men who are likely to commit rape also have beliefs that support the rape myth, such as a belief that rape is justified and that the perception that the victim enjoyed the rape. Psychological characteristics that play a part in a man's inclination to express sexual aggression against women. Dominance is a motive for sexual behavior. Hostility toward women, accepting attitudes toward sexual aggression, antisocial characteristics or psychoticism, sexual experience, physiological arousal to depictions of rape. Whether an individual will be sexually aggressive is mediated by several factors. Dean and Malamuth in 1997 found that males who are at risk for sexual violence against women were most likely to behave in a sexually aggressive way if they were also self-centered. A high-risk male who is not self-centered, but rather is sensitive to the needs of others, is not likely to behave in a sexually aggressive way. Malmuth, Heavey, and Lenz in 1993 found that males who are high in empathy are less likely to show arousal to scenes of sexual violence than males who are low in empathy. Sexual aggression in males, exposure to mild forms of nonviolent erotica tends to decrease sexual aggression against women. Exposure to explicit or sexually violent erotica tends to increase sexual aggression against women, but not against men. Individuals who are angry are more likely to be more aggressive after viewing sexually explicit or violent materials than are individuals who are not angry. Male college students are aroused by depictions of rape. However, men who show a greater predisposition to rape are more aroused, especially if the woman is portrayed as being aroused as well. Exposure to media portrayals of sexual aggression against women increases acceptance of such acts and contributes to the rape myth. Thus, sexually explicit violent materials contribute to a social climate that tolerates rape. No single psychological characteristic predisposes a man to sexual aggression. Instead, several characteristics interact to increase the likelihood that a man will be sexually aggressive toward women. Antisocial behavior begins early in life and results from poor parenting. The time to target aggression is during early childhood when the socialization process is just underway. Teachers, health workers, and police need to look for signs of abuse and neglect and intervene as soon as possible. Waiting until an aggressive child is older is not the best course of action. Intervention attempts with adolescents produce only temporary reductions in aggression. One way to counter the development of aggression is to give parents guidance with their parenting. Parents who show tendencies toward inept parenting can be identified, perhaps through child welfare agencies or schools, and offered training programs in productive parenting skills. Such training programs have been shown to be effective in reducing noncompliant and aggressive behavior in children. Children whose parents received training in productive parenting skills were also less likely to show aggressive behavior as adolescents. If a child learns to be empathic and altruistic in his or her social interactions, aggression is less likely to occur. To support the development of prosocial behaviors, parents can take 4 specific steps. Set clear rules and explain to children why certain behaviors are unacceptable. Provide children with age-appropriate opportunities to help others, such as setting the table, cooking dinner, and teaching younger siblings. Attribute prosocial behavior to the child's internal characteristics. Provide children with prosocial role models who demonstrate caring, empathy, helping, and other positive traits. The social information processing view of aggression is a view stating that how a person processes social information mediates aggression. There are 5 important steps involved in instigating aggression, according to social information processing view of aggression. These are: we perceive and decode cues from our social environment. We develop expectations of others' behavior based on our attribution of intent. We look for possible responses. We decide which response is most appropriate. We carry out the chosen response. And of course, if we look at this dog growling, this is exactly what we're talking about. We're looking for social cues. Programs to assess and treat aggressive children have been developed using cognitive intervention techniques. Some programs use behavior management strategies, teaching individuals to effectively manage their social behavior, to establish and enforce rules in non-confrontational way, non-confrontational way. Aggressive children and adults can be exposed to positive role models and taught to consider non-aggressive solutions to problems. Interventions in the schools can also be effective in reducing aggression. And that is it. So I'll talk to you next week. I'm not sure what we're talking about. I think we're talking about altruism next week.